Hello, and thank you for joining my presentation. So just a few disclaimers before we get started. Firstly, depictions of weaponry are included in this presentation because we are talking about fantasy role-playing games. There are just visual cartoon depictions of weaponry, and it's simply to encapsulate what it's like to play the game, as well as be used as an educational resource. And secondly, there are brief mentions of players discussing some experiences of processing grief and trauma through playing the game. However, I do not go into detail about these topics. So without further ado, my name is Shilah Mossinger, and my dissertation is titled Rolling for Investigation, Using Dungeons & Dragons as a Means for Self-Exploration and Identity Formation. So firstly, there are some terms to know before we get started. D&D means Dungeons & Dragons. DM stands for Dungeon Master. NPC is non-player character. RPG is role-playing game, and TTRPG is tabletop role-playing game. So a bit about me before we get into the research. I've been playing D&D for about 3 years. However, I've been interested in the fantasy genre since I was very young. And when I started getting into D&D, I began playing campaigns and video games associated with D&D and other fantasy role-playing games. And then I started making friends in the community and having these conversations with them. And as someone in the psychological field, I couldn't help but notice patterns and behavior between people who play D&D, such as similar experiences in character creation. So, what is D&D? Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game that is set in a fantasy universe, and players gather in small groups to play a session of D&D, and when players participate in multiple sessions of the same storyline, it's called the campaign. And each session consists of one DM who tells the story and guides the players along their adventure, and everything is imagined. There are no physical game pieces, props, cards, anything required, although some DMs may use these to aid player imagination. And all players need are these sets of dice. They look like this. Sometimes that's all that will be on the table. Sometimes there will only be dice, and that is all a player needs to play the game. So firstly comes character creation. At the beginning of a campaign, players will create their character, and they'll choose the character's race, class, abilities, etc., and note all of these down on a character sheet. And players will often come up with a backstory for their character, which helps them to make decisions according to their character's personality throughout the sessions, which aids in the roleplay element of the game. So D&D overall encourages many different forms of expressing yourself through creativity, socialization, storytelling, and because players are spending this time engaging themselves in these stories, it's possible that their characters may include elements of the players within them. And in D&D, characters may confront moral dilemmas, make decisions, or interact with the D&D world. So who is making these decisions? Are they influenced by the person playing them, or are the characters somehow acting on their own accord without being affected by the player's own values? So let's get into some previous literature. A previous study has stated that adults use leisure time and activities to form their identities, and it was found that self-exploration and identity formation are extremely prevalent in emerging adults during leisure activities. And D&D is globally a popular leisure activity, especially among emerging adults, and so the questions that I ask are, does D&D encourage the same aspects of self-exploration and identity formation? And what are the benefits and risks that playing D&D may include? And so asking these questions and acknowledging previous literature might lead to a conclusion of if and how D&D might be used in a therapeutic setting. So going into the method. Our participants were all adults. They were all over 18 years old. They all had previous or current experience of playing D&D, and they had access to and capability using video calling software for a remote interview. And so our participants that we interviewed there was originally 12 of them. However, we had 2 withdrawals, which left 10 total participants. And they ranged from ages 18 to 34, and they were from the USA, the UK, and Japan. And they had varying race, gender identity, sexuality, nationality, and age, and there were no incentives given to take part in this study. Every participant participated because they wanted to, according to their own free will. So we used a qualitative research design, and for the interviews, we used semi-structured interviews, so they were scripted with improvised questions to explore or gain clarification. And there were 12 open-ended questions that were asked, which encouraged participants to reflect and describe their experiences of playing D&D. And how we interpreted it was using a thematic analysis framework, and it was flexible analysis, which helped us find recurring patterns throughout the interviews. So with the procedure, we asked questions about the participants' general thoughts on D&D, specific experiences, information about their characters, understanding of social situations within the game, and they were given the opportunity to interpret and respond to these questions however they wanted to. And all identifying information about the participants were anonymized, and this study also adheres to the BPS and BACP ethical guidelines. All right, so the results, this is what I found in the study. I came to a conclusion of 6 overarching themes, and those were self-exploration and identity formation, creative expression, social understanding, mental and emotional well-being, and importance of a safe space, as well as risks and limitations. And I will include quotes in these next few slides. I'm not going to read them out. However, feel free to pause and read them out if you wish to gain more insight as to what these participants experienced. So every participant mentioned some experience of self-exploration and identity formation while playing D&D, whether this was intentionally, which included their own personality and their characters, and because some find it easier when role-playing as themselves, or perhaps to be able to relate to these characters better. And some included personality traits which they don't personally identify with, perhaps things that they want to have in real life, or exaggerating traits about themselves which they really enjoy. And even if players try not to incorporate aspects of themselves into their characters, many reported that this happened without intention, that sometimes it's hard not to involve themselves in the character. Another aspect is finding or exploring aspects of themselves by placing them into their characters, perhaps to push their creative side or experience things that they can experience in real life. And 4 participants also mentioned playing characters who are opposite to their own personality. But 3 of them expressed difficulty in keeping up this role play. Either the characters eventually became closer aligned to the player's own personality, or the player experienced burnout and ended up not being able to play these characters anymore. And lastly, exploring gender and sexuality was a prevalent theme among participants, and some explained that they had known their identity beforehand but felt that D&D was a safe space to explore this. And others had discovered this part of themselves by playing characters with these identities and realizing how easy it was to roleplay and to identify with these characters. The second theme that I found was creative expression. So all but one participant mentioned that D&D offers a space to be creative and express themselves. Storytelling, world building, and character creation were reported as the main means of expressing creativity while playing and using it as a sort of outlet. Some participants even expressed that because of the creativity they use in the game, D&D has helped them raise their confidence levels and become more comfortable in their abilities overall. Thirdly, we have social understanding. So socialization is critical to making a good D&D campaign, and all participants mentioned this and said that socialization is a large benefit of playing. Some said that they enjoyed collaborating on a collective story or even just being with friends. And others went into detail on how D&D has helped them understand how others might work in different situations and to understand different perspectives. Next, we have mental and emotional well-being. Several participants stated that playing D&D is a great way to learn about and improve their psychological well-being. 3 participants disclosed that D&D was their way of coping with real-life trauma and grief and talking and processing those feelings through roleplay. One participant discussed a specific experience with their current character, which has led them to learn more and reflect on their own mental health, saying that their character is a therapist, so they did research to help them roleplay, and through this they learned therapeutic techniques, which they actually use in real life. And others described using D&D as a way to have a break from these real-life troubles, to leave worries behind and recharge, or to just remove themselves from life stressors. And so next we have the theme of importance of a safe space. And although brief, this theme was highly emphasized by participants. And it's different from risks and limitations because a safe space allows the other benefits to take place. And I'll go a little bit more into detail about this later, but I think it's important to establish this as its own theme. And I do have a quote right here. I'm not going to read it out, but I feel like this is very important, and I really encourage you to pause and to read it if you would like. So lastly, we have the theme of risks and limitations. And most participants mentioned that there's some sort of limitation to these benefits to consider before playing D&D, such as previous negative experiences, which tend to have an impact on interest and playstyle. And bigotry and prejudice seems to be quite prevalent in the wider D&D community and sometimes normalized, so certain people may be at a higher risk for emotional harm. And there were some mentions of difficulties in roleplay as well, especially when playing a character different from themselves due to their own personal limits. One participant said they couldn't play a skeptical character, for instance, because their real selves would fall for things that the character otherwise wouldn't. And regarding previous themes of self-discovery and emotional health, some players may not be ready to confront this. All right, so the discussion. This is what our findings mean in the study. So first, there's some existing research that we should take into account. Firstly, we have a study which was published by Gran in 2021, which found that playing fantasy games can encourage self-exploration in players, and role-playing in an imaginary fantasy world can act as a catalyst for self-exploration and self-discovery. However, this research only supported online fantasy video games and not in-person role-play. And our study focuses on the in-person social setting of fantasy role-playing, specifically D&D as a tabletop role-playing game. And being in person and participating in this role-play has the potential to change the experiences or behaviors of the players. And it's important to acknowledge both online and in-person settings when discussing these benefits of role-playing games, and the core of our study is the latter. Next, we have Howell's study that was published in 2023, which researched how D&D can be used in a therapeutic setting and focused on the wider concept of the fantasy role-playing game in the therapy room. And Howell specifically suggested the use of D&D as an intervention for therapy, using established therapeutic philosophies as evidence to back up this claim. And although this study does give us evidence to support our claim, Howell's research leans more towards forming a theory rather than looking at the general effect of D&D on its players. And our study aims to find the benefits, risks, and limitations of D&D overall, and using this to support theories that use D&D as a way to explore yourself psychologically. And this research can add to the conclusion that Howell makes regarding the use of D&D as a form of therapeutic intervention for clients. And it was also intended to study the benefits of fantasy role-playing on the overall psychology of an adult and how this may benefit or hinder aspects of their forming identity. And lastly, we have Walsh and Linehan's study, which was published in 2024. While our study was awaiting ethical approval, it was identified after I had already completed thematic analysis. And this study has a very, very similar approach. It had the same thematic analysis framework, similar themes identified, the same sort of semi-structured interviews, and even participants with nearly the same demographics. In Walsh and Linehan's study, it had very similar findings. It looks at the overall mental health benefits of playing D&D with one theme as self-exploration, whereas our study's core is self-exploration while touching on mental health benefits. And although these studies have very similar approaches, there are a few differences in terms of specific findings. So, for example, we found a larger theme of identity in the self, whereas Walsh and Linehan viewed mental health as more prominent. And all in all, it just concludes that our two studies support each other and present the strong links between D&D, mental health, and self-exploration. And this just adds to the credibility of both conclusions that were made. And our research, along with Walsh and Linehan's, also showed that this study can be easily replicated in different settings. As for the conclusions that were made regarding self-exploration and identity, I want to first define that narrative identity means the internal view of oneself that is ever-changing. So it's what people use to make sense of themselves within the social context and the world around them. It's highly formed in younger adults, and that almost perfectly aligns with the demographics of the study's participants, age 18 to 34. More precisely, higher rates of self-exploration and identity formation happen around this age, regardless of gender identity or sociocultural context. And participants in our study described how D&D allowed a space for them to explore themselves, ultimately carving a path for this narrative identity to take place. And participants described that embodying a fantastical character in an imaginative world allowed them to explore different personality traits and behaviors without these real-life consequences, and trying out personality traits that they don't get to try out in real life, perhaps feeling freedom and releasing that part of themselves that might be kept hidden normally. A few participants played characters vastly different from themselves, and some detailing the difficulty in breaching their moral values. Ultimately, the player is making the decisions, whether role-playing or not, so they found this really difficult. In this case, though, if comfortable, the player is able to explore these less agreeable behaviors within D&D. And because of its fantastical setting, D&D provides a space for players to act in ways that may be consequential in real life, however, without any real repercussions. As for creative benefits, creativity has been found to provide plenty of mental health benefits, such as lower stress levels, coping strategies, better cognitive processing, and general passion and interest in life. And similarly, D&D provides many outlets for creativity to take place, such as character creation and customization and backstory creation, improvisation through roleplay, continuous character building throughout sessions, and art opportunities, such as physical art interpretations of the characters in someone's campaign. In social benefits, it is widely reported that D&D provides a collaborative space for players to interact, and this has been highly sought after, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. And due to its versatility as a fully imaginative game, players took to online modalities to continue the socialization at a time where isolation was required. And needless to say, D&D is a strong source of community for many players, which in itself provides its own mental health benefits. And these include sense of belonging, general motivation, and confidence. And there are plenty of D&D communities that people are a part of, such as online forums, TV shows, school clubs and societies, movies, video games, artists, and content creators who play D&D as their career. And as for the limits, the space must be comfortable enough for the player to explore their identity. If their group isn't safe or welcoming, the players likely won't be comfortable engaging in the roleplay. Comfortability is crucial to allow a person to reflect inwardly and partake in narrative identity exploration. Many groups and DMs can achieve this level of comfortability by gaining consent for including any potentially stressful situations, establishing clear communication around player comfort levels, and engaging in some sort of debrief or reflective conversation after each session, which allows players to process the events that have happened. So thinking about this, let's take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you're not familiar with it, it is a pyramid that shows the hierarchy of human needs. The lower the need is, the more basic, the more necessary it is. So as you can see at the very bottom is physiological needs, followed by safety, love and belonging, esteem, and finally self-actualization. And this studies themes of creativity, social bonding, psychological well-being, and self-exploration. They all fall into categories above safety. So in order to experience all of these benefits, a player must first feel safe. So going into the risks associated with D&D. So although there are many encouraging benefits that we found in this study, it's important to recognize these risks associated with D&D to make the space feel more comfortable and safe. So there is prejudice in the game. One of the examples is tieflings. A picture of a tiefling is on the left. They're a humanoid race in D&D which descend from devils, and canonically they're commonly discriminated against by other races because of their ancestry and their stereotypical personalities. Another example is drows, or dark elves. They're a subrace of elves which come from a place in the D&D universe called the Underdark. They live in a highly matriarchal society and are typically extremely misandrous, and they tend to be feared or despised and seen as evil by other races. So some players tend to ignore or remove this part of the universe in order to enjoy the game or escape from these types of difficulties, which they may experience in real life. And others may instead use this part of the game to build empathy and to understand different perspectives. In fact, perhaps because of this, D&D players tend to show higher levels of empathy compared to non-players. This has been found through a few studies. So really, it's up to personal opinion as to whether these are hindrances and burdens on the players or whether this is an opportunity for personal growth. And because D&D players have a significant potential to engage in self-exploration and self-discovery through D&D, they may come across aspects of themselves which they're not ready to confront. And this can be a scary experience. So if this happens, the player may step away from D&D and avoid this self-exploration. And from there, if they do that, it is up to them whether they want to confront that discovery or explore it or continue to avoid it. And depending on the direction they choose, it can either be a moment of great self-discovery or it can lead them down the path of declining mental health. As for the implications as to what these findings mean, ultimately it can be concluded that D&D shows significant potential for use by counselors, mental health practitioners, or just individuals to engage in self-exploration and identity formation by playing D&D. And there are some additional benefits, which I stated are creative development, social development, and emotional development. And in order to experience these benefits, it's really important to establish a safe space and avoid risks where possible. Limitations, according to our research. Firstly, our participants resided in 3 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Japan. So further research can be done to replicate the study in some non-Westernized countries and cultures to understand whether there are differences depending on the socio-cultural context of players. Secondly, participants range from ages 18 to 34. So where possible and ethical, further research can be conducted with adolescent participants under 18 or older participants over 34 to gain a deeper understanding of the benefits at different stages of life. And lastly, this study was conducted using reflective accounts from players, which were told through individual interviews. So further research can be conducted using a more experimental design, offering D&D sessions as a real-life intervention to see whether these benefits show themselves in action. Feel free to put any questions in the comments and I will do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. I will be showing the references on the next screen. They are on a few different pages, so feel free to pause and read them if you would like. So thank you for joining me on this presentation and I hope you enjoyed.